Operation Gridlock as drivers swarm the Michigan Capitol protesting the coronavirus lockdown measures. They're not just coming out in by themselves, standing next to each other. Some people are, but many people are in their cars, self-isolating, but protesting, saying it's time to reopen the economy. Now we're seeing a lot of progressives, for some reason, coming after protesters and making fun of them and belittling them. And I find it kind of funny. Now, there's a fair point to be made that we're not just talking about your rights, but also your responsibilities. If you could potentially spread an infectious disease, which could kill somebody, then you have a responsibility not to cause harm to another person. It becomes increasingly difficult when you can't see the enemy and you have to just trust the government the problem exists. So now we're seeing these protests, one of which is an attempt to create a massive traffic jam. Another thing I want to point out in this is that a lot of people were convinced that you couldn't buy seeds in Michigan. I believe that was an exaggeration, and I've got a story for you. But first, let's see what's going on with these protests, why they're doing it. Drivers swarm Michigan Capitol to protest coronavirus lockdown measures. Hundreds of cars, trucks, and SUVs descended on Michigan State Capitol Wednesday afternoon as part of a noisy protest against Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's social distancing restrictions that critics say have gone too far. Dubbed Operation Gridlock and organized by the Michigan Conservative Coalition, the protest did just that, creating bumper-to-bumper traffic throughout downtown Lansing as demonstrators blasted their horns, waved American flags, and hoisted placards deriding Whitmer's orders and demanding that she reopen the state's economy. The lockdown measures are meant to curb the spread of the coronavirus outbreak, but Whitmer has gone further than some other governors. And the backlash in Michigan is among the most heated in the country. You see, this is what I talk about with the Chinese finger trap problem. You want people to lock down? You don't come out and bash them over the head and say, you can't do this. You say, please don't do this. And then when some people do too much, you just ask them politely to stop. Like a better example would be, don't ban people from going to beaches. Just tell them the beaches will be closed. Please don't go. If you go in a small group. And if too many people show up, then you show up and say, hey, everybody, I'm sorry to do this, but there's too many people here. We're going to have to ask you to leave. It's that simple. Instead, what do? Michigan went hard against everybody, basically, and had some of the strictest measures, resulting in protests. Now, these people are getting mad about the protests. I don't understand. When the government comes down too hard, you protest. It's what we do. Yes, people are risking their safety and other people's safety, but you want to have a conversation about protest and your right to do so. I'd argue that if we lost the right to protest, things would get even more dangerous because the government would do who knows what. The government is not something you should necessarily trust, and we've had to fight for our rights. It's the history of humanity. They say, quote, let's start with the fact that some countries have no or very few COVID cases and yet are totally shut down. Some counties, sorry. Roseanne Pankowski, president of the Michigan Conservative Coalition, said in a statement, when did a one-size solution solve everyone's local issues? Governor Whitmer, will put you out of business before allowing mere citizens to be responsible for their own behavior. This is madness. Whitmer announced over the weekend an expansion to her state stay-at-home orders, which, among other things, prohibits residents from visiting family or friends with exceptions for providing care, bans public and private gatherings regardless of size or family ties, and places restrictions on what types of businesses may operate and in what capacity. Michigan has the fourth largest number of confirmed cases in the U.S., with more than 27,000 being reported as of Wednesday. The orders, which are in place until at least May 1st, quickly drew criticism from conservative Republicans in the state, who argue that the governor is turning Michigan into a nanny state and impeding their civil liberties. Quarantine is when you restrict movement of sick people. Tyranny is when you restrict the movement of healthy people, Michonne Maddock, an organizer of Operation Gridlock with the Michigan Conservative Coalition, told Fox News. Every person has learned a harsh lesson about social distancing. We don't need a nanny state to tell people how to be careful. Whitmer, who had to issue clarifications to her orders, most notably when someone tweeted a picture from Walmart saying that children's car seats were non-essential items, has so far remained steady in her resolve that Michigan needs to stick to strict stay-at-home orders measures in order to tackle the virus. She has also recognized, however, that residents have a right to protest under the Constitution, but ask demonstrators to do so safely. I can respect that. But I look, when you come out and tell people we're locking everything down to an extreme degree that you can't even go out with your own family members, don't be surprised when they protest you. And you have just made things worse. The police apparently arrested one person. They violate social distancing to remove one person. Let them protest. If they get sick, it's their choice. It's their responsibility. They have chosen liberty and potentially death. Do I think they're all going to die from corona? No. They may spread it to others, which is a problem. But these people made a choice. You can back away, and it may make things worse, but we have to balance freedom and security. Because there was one banner that said, security with no freedom is prison. Quote, everyone has a right to protest and speak up. We recognize that some people are angry and frustrated, and that's okay. Whitmer's office said in a statement Wednesday. The governor will always defend everyone's right to free speech. We just ask those who choose to protest these orders to do so in a manner that doesn't put their health or the health of our first responders at risk. The organizers of Operation Gridlock have asked anyone participating in Wednesday's protest to display signs, make noise, and be disruptive, but stay in your vehicle so that the Whitmer police cannot say you are ignoring the social distancing order. They have also asked people not to carpool because gas is cheap and warned them not to drink too much liquids because they will not be able to access any public restrooms. We can get this rally done and stay within social distancing guidelines, Marion Sheridan, co-founder of the Michigan Conservative Coalition, said in a statement. Citizens are frankly tired of being treated like babies. As adults, we now know what needs to be done to stay safe. We also believe the liberal attack on the economy is becoming a serious threat right now. Join us in Lansing. We need to stop the madness, and Whitmer needs a plan to reopen Michigan's economy before it's too late. There have already been, I think, hundreds of thousands of people in Michigan who have called for Whitmer to be recalled over this. Operation Gridlock is just one of a number of demonstrations of civil disobedience across the country by Americans upset with their state's stay-at-home orders amid the pandemic. While the contagion has sickened more than 610,000 people in the U.S. and killed over 26,000 people, protesters from North Carolina to Wyoming said they've been just as concerned with the economic and financial impact from shutdowns, echoing President Trump's complaint that the cure could be worse than the virus. Alex Berenson, a former New York Times reporter who has been sounding the alarm about what he believes are flawed models dictating the aggressive strategy, drew attention to the protest in North Carolina as well as a social media uproar in Michigan. As someone wrote me, people in Michigan know when you lose jobs, they don't come back, he tweeted. As for unemployment, some 16.8 million Americans have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks, meaning 1 in 10 working Americans was out of a job. The figures collectively constituted the largest and fastest string of job losses in records dating to 1948. By contrast, during the Great Recession, it took 44 weeks, roughly 10 months, for unemployment claims to go as high as they have in less than a month. Last Thursday, dozens of protesters carrying placards and wearing Guy Fawkes masks ignored Ohio's social distancing guidelines to demonstrate on the steps of the state's Capitol building in Columbus against Governor Mike DeWine, a Republican, and his administration's handling of the outbreak. Demonstrators held signs reading "Open Ohio," "Quarantine worse than virus," and "Social distancing or social conditioning, we do not consent." I want to point out one very important thing. We have this fact check from USA Today. They say that Governor Gretchen Whitmer did not ban the sale of American flags and plants. One of the things we saw was that people were claiming seeds were not available for purchase. I may have incorrectly stated as such. If I do, I apologize. So we have this fact check, and many other people have pointed out you can buy these things. Now, the executive order did shut down certain portions of stores that were too large. But apparently, here's what they say. The order notes large stores must close off areas of stores meant for carpeting, flooring, furniture, gardening, and paint. The limits only apply to in-person sales and do not apply to stores with less than 50,000 square feet. Large stores are further required to implement measures that promote social distancing. The clarification here is not that they banned the sale of seeds, but that certain stores, the more common ones, had to close off certain sections, meaning in many places you were probably not able to buy seeds, and in some places you probably were. It wasn't a specific ban on seeds. That doesn't excuse what these people are doing. We saw Trump mention they may do a hard quarantine of 3 states, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. He later changed his, he asserted his position later on because they didn't have a definitive one, saying we're not going to do it. We're going to issue strong guidelines. That was the right move, 100%. It's the responsibility on us. Not everybody's going to abide by it, but I'll tell you what, When they came out and said, don't buy masks, what did people do? They went out and bought like every single mask. That was not the right thing to do. They should have said nothing, to be honest. They wanted to make sure that the healthcare workers got masks first. But if the government comes out and says you can't do it, guess what? People are going to complain. It's human nature. We know it. It's a thing called reverse psychology. The best thing that she could have done is said, don't go out because you'll cause loss of life. They could have implemented strict rules pertaining to these things. One of the smartest things governments can do when they're trying to restrict behavior is not ban it outright, but place certain restrictions on it. Let the stores open up, but say there can only be a certain amount of people per section. How about that? Then people wouldn't say you can't buy seeds. They'd say nothing, because you'd go to the store and there'd be no one buying seeds anyway. And if you wanted to, they could just have an employee grab the objects for you. That's another simple thing. She could have said, not that they're closing these things off, but a staff member for certain size stores will have to go and acquire the items upon request. There's other things they could have done. Instead, these authoritarian types issue blanket sweeping rules because they think they're smart enough to control the whole system, and they're not. And this is what leads to protest. Well, the protesters have stayed in their cars. That's smart. What else can you say? As this drags on, and it might get worse, we're going to see more of this. And if they keep pushing these authoritarian rules, there will be a breakdown, and that's the last thing we need. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.